welcome to Borderlines. It is December 30, 2024, and we are here with our annual year in review and predictions for the next year episode with Tamara Mosher Kutzer out in Ottawa. Thanks for coming on for the annual episode. You were just saying before we started recording that we sounded so optimistic last
Oh
year.
God.
I don't know if I'd say we sounded optimistic. I think we sounded less pessimistic than the year turned out. But in going back and listening to the episode, where I want to start, Tamara, is you were very optimistic leading into 2024 about the innovation stream. And I think you said that it could solve our LMIA woes in 2024, that it could be a fair weather broad program. So how'd that all play out?
Like this
Uh,
this year, if I had to like sum it up, has been like the year of the crackdown, the unexpected. It's like 2015 revisited. Nothing has turned out at all. Like it's been like whack-a-mole. Like I thought COVID was bad in terms of trying to keep up, and COVID was bad in terms of like trying to keep up on top of what was like the changes as they were coming so quickly. Um, but the the changes this year have been so catastrophic, and like Steve and I were both doing a conference. I was there in person and Steve was virtual on February 29th,
Oh
when the
yeah.
change happened. When they canceled the Mexican ability to come on ETA. And like the whole year has been like that. The whole year has been like,
Yeah. The year has been one change for more restrictions after the next. The innovation
mhm.
stream that Tamara was talking about was branded in 2022 as possibly a broad-based LMIA exemption for people in certain occupations. And when it came down, it was an LMIA exemption for 8 up-and-coming companies.
who don't even know. Like, so I've spoken
Yeah.
to some of the in-house counsel just randomly. I've spoken to some of the in-house counsel for some of those companies. They didn't even know about it. They didn't even know they qualified for this program. Like nobody. And I remember talking in 2022 to employers about we have to get you on the government radar to like figure out how you can, but like no, just no.
Yeah. That
Clio
pretty
Clio
much
is on the list of.
Clio's on the list. Clio, I think, is the only BC company on the list. So like, yeah, the only innovative company in BC according to IRCC. I
I
don't know.
I had to
I don't know what the
Google
list
all
is
the,
supposed to symbolize. If I'm looking at my phone, I have all my notes on the phone from the episode. But yeah,
like I had to Google most of the companies. I'd never heard of most of the companies, these very innovative up and coming companies that so need foreign workers.
yeah. The other tone from last year, Deanna had said that she utterly had lost faith in. Has that changed in the past year?
I'm actually like it's sort of in a funny way, I was so pessimistic last year that now I'm just kind of rolling with it in a different way. Like none of it really surprised me because I think I just got there kind of early, and maybe that's just, I don't know. Nothing surprises me now. I'm just like, that's why I've kind of turned to hilarity instead of just getting more embittered and entrenched, I just like I'm looking for kind of amusement. And it's funny because I mean, I think the biggest story of 2024 was this, oh my goodness, we've let in too many workers and students. But we were talking about that last year, this was not a big secret. This was a well-known thing. This was happening right in front of everybody's eyes. And then all of these um, these efforts to step it back. Uh, when, it's sort of, it's like the cat is out of the bag already, people are actually here, human lives are here, it's not just as easy as like, okay, well, we're going to reverse that. So yeah, I think that definitely, one of the other things that I think we pointed out in the last episode was the changing attitude towards immigration. And we were starting to anticipate that this last year. But this year, I think it's really crystallized. And I think it's become a very broad-based sentiment that Canada has lost its love for the acceptance of newcomers and of all in all programming, and so I think that that's the sad part that I would really um, you know, I don't see how that changes. And that's, I think, where my focus has been.
Yeah.
I think like
Yeah.
part of what happened in 2022 going into 2023, 2023 going into 2024, but it's been particularly bad. It's been like the Austin, like the scene in Austin Powers where they're coming with the slow roller coming to mow them down. We knew things were coming. We didn't know exactly what they were going to be, and we didn't know how bad they were going to be, but and that's been kind of the worst part for me about this year. Like, we know the change is coming to the spousal open work permit to C41. We've known it for months. We just don't know who it's going to impact exactly and when it's going to come. So it's like as lawyers, we're trying to react and protect our clients, but we don't exactly know who we need to protect or how we need to protect them.
And
And that,
normally they come in same day.
yeah,
So if there's a restriction, it is announced in the morning or even the afternoon, and it takes effect that day. The
For
exception
sure.
is that they've said that they're going to take away points, or not take away points, but there will no longer be extra points for arranged employment,
but they
and
haven't
they're
said
giving
that. See,
months notice.
like they've said spring, but they haven't said if it's going to be qualifying offer of arranged employment or if it's only going to be LMIA or if it's going to be work permit based on LMIA with experience. Like, they haven't explained exactly how they're going to cut it. And I think that unknown, that uncertainty is so problematic because you just can't plan.
Mm. And I think the other part of it is that, like, I think most immigration lawyers that I know anyways they still want something that makes sense, that's purposeful, that, is not people arriving to not be able to work. They're wanting something that actually is like a viable plan for their clients. But I think we're all struggling to understand the why of everything, like, yes, I understand you want to bring the levels down, but why these people? Why is this program being cut and that one not? And, so I think that trying to understand the rationale behind the policy changes is what's become really perplexing.
Well, so like I was looking, so with the change with polling, for example,
Which I
I would
predicted.
you did
I
predict,
predicted it, not in
you
the
had
not the way they did it, but the ending of flagpole.
so like they could have done it surgically, like they did with the post-graduation work permit. They said, no, you guys can't do it anymore. Okay, so that makes sense. You're taking a surgical approach. We know a lot of people are applying in this way at the border. Okay, I can get behind that. But then why eliminate absolutely everybody? You tweeted, Steve, a few months ago, the numbers of IMP people who were flagpoling. And the big categories were C41, C42, like C46, C47. It's the spouses. That the vast majority of IMP people who were flagpoling were spousal open work permit applicants. So again, why not just surgically cut it and say, not those guys?
Yeah. Well, I think that the politics of it all, like I didn't foresee flagpoling ending as a result of the Trump tweet. And actually, just today, the US ambassador to Canada has thanked Trudeau or the government for abolishing flagpoling.
He says we'll
So
free up 4,000 to 8,000 labor days per year, which seems
I mean,
questionable.
I don't know. It's like everyone who goes down there. I think the, the system is very bizarre. Like it's always been weird that you have to show up on the US side. Why you couldn't just go to CBSA and be treated as having left Canada without having to bug the Americans, especially given what we then talked about a bit on the podcast, where they've
Mm.
been questions about whether that's a refusal and if it's misrep to not disclose it. Like it's very bizarre to me that that was ever part of flag polling. But why, like to me, applying for a work permit and processing work permits is a pretty important CBSA function. And I would argue
Mm.
it's more important than being like, did you get gas in the States? Yes. And like all the custom stuff
Yeah,
is important, but I think getting the ability of a family to work, CBSA views it as a nuisance. I view it as like a pretty important function.
integral. Yeah,
One that they should
exactly.
be proud that they do, even if they have to do it because IRCC is slow.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a similar one like that, like when the changes you mentioned with the post-grad work permits, things like when they started saying, okay, because of this housing crisis, we won't let certain people bring their spouses. Like again, um how does that help anything? So now you're dividing families. Now you have one income rather than two incomes, and those
And who
families
can
need to live
survive
in,
on that?
like,
Like,
who can? And so I just don't understand. And the ones that are the most senior, like the C-suites, oh, you can have your spouse, but the ones that are earning not really a fully living wage, you can't have your spouse. And so again, I can't for the life of me figure out how this, and also like it doesn't change the issue of the housing crisis because it's still the person still requires a place to live, whether it's for one person or for two. But it just feels punitive and it makes it so much less practical. And I think that the consequences in terms of like what Canada's market value is, you know, in terms of recruiting great students from around the world for specific labor shortages, for example, or just for the international scholarship, we get taken off the table if it means that I have to do that without my family.
or for the spouses of foreign workers coming down the line, like who wants to move here without their family or come here with, oh, I'm making 150,000 and then my two kids and my spouse and I all have to live on that salary. Like, sure, 150,000 sounded like a great salary for a family of four to live off of maybe a decade ago, but it's not anymore.
You'll have to see what the rules are. It's also always funny to read, like when they bring in these rules and you juxtapose the rationale for why they originally had the open spousal work permit. So when they broadened it to go from spouses of skilled workers to all spouses, then I think it was Sean Fraser had press releases about how there were studies that showed the positive impact on mental health
Right.
and how it was good for the economy. And you're like, okay, were those
Did that
studies wrong?
change?
Has that changed? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, this is to me what happens when you don't have the kind of regulatory impact analysis process is that there doesn't need to be any rationale. It's just we want fewer bodies, so we are going to make this change. That doesn't have to go through that kind of discussion. It's just one and done. And
so what's interesting also, just and this segues into another thing that we predicted, or at least I predicted was, although it took all the way to the end of the year, was that there was going to be the regulations would be announced for an administrative monetary penalty regime for authorized reps. And I said there would be confusion over whether it applied to lawyers as well.
There's no
There is
confusion.
no confusion. It applies to lawyers. But where the segue comes in is in the regulatory impact assessment. It said that the Federation of Canadian Law Societies had no complaints, which isn't true. And they've since written a letter saying, hey, that's not representative of what we said. And it kind of just, what the use of those regulatory impact assessments, Deanna, kind of starts to go out the window if stuff's just getting
hmm,
inaccurately portrayed in them.
sure enough. Yeah, but that too, like, again, I mean, we had talked about it previously, and I think we talked about it on last year's recap, was the shift from, doing the work of immigration to just doing the work of enforcement. And I think that paradigm has even more fully come to pass, which is that, yes, there's no question that there are bad actors there. But what we are seeing, in my view, is not a focused surgical, as Tamara said, you know, honing in on, you know, where the bad acting is being done, but rather a very widespread, generalized. And the ones that actually tend to get caught out are more often than not the low-hanging fruit, which are not the incidents of true, you know, and this is not just the case with the thing about regulating or complaining against representatives, but like I'm talking about this even in terms of organized criminality, in terms of security concerns, like all of these allegations. It's not that they're coming, they're finding those who are truly intending to do harm, but rather, well, this is possible, and by inference, we think that there is a potential future risk, and that's where they're doing it. And
Yeah.
so that's the problem with enforcement, is that when it's done poorly, it's just everyone gets swept up in the same investigation, and then nothing is actually accomplished except for much more prohibition.
You predicted a big rise in organized crime cases, which I don't know if what the data shows. Did you notice it, like in your own practice anecdotally, that there was a big rise in
I
organized
did,
crime?
and I chaired a conference a couple weeks ago, and I asked this question to the immigration division, and they said this is real, that there is a significant uptick in like serious inadmissibilities over the last year.
Yeah, I mean the big serious incidents. The other thing when we were talking last year was there were delays with Chinese applicants. I made what in hindsight seems like a really obvious prediction that those delays would lead to something. When I listened to that, that almost felt like a Deanna, something will happen. Me saying like the delays will lead to a decision, which there was. So
Was
like
that before or after? Did we record that before or after Lee came
so
down?
we recorded it before Lee. So
Before.
what I didn't predict was that the decision would actually be the first thing we would learn would be a federal court case that actually upheld the inadmissibility finding, which sort of like threw the way that I thought everything would go regarding that, which was we'd see a flurry of refusals and then the JRs would build. It actually started with the federal court upholding a decision. Lee is probably the most famous case of 2024, which is that it expanded the definition of espionage to include cases where people provide publicly available material to foreign actors. And
That they
the
might
federal court upheld it.
prospectively,
They might
maybe.
prospectively as well be coerced in the future. One thing that has surprised me
Without
is
any
that
adverse information about that human.
No, that they
Yeah.
have never committed espionage, but that they might.
yeah, but that espionage itself doesn't even really require malintent. Like under the new definition, that student saying in their study plan that they were going to take what they learned about microfluids in Canada for the benefit of some industry in China counts as espionage.
Even
and
though
then-
the information that they learned was learned in the lecture theater at a public post-secondary university.
Yeah. So we have one case upholding it. What kind of surprised me is that there hasn't been a single other published federal court case that kind of helps clarify what the law is on this.
But what we are hearing from our colleagues is that there are a lot of procedural fairness letters going out,
Oh,
and
yeah.
some people are not responding to the procedural fairness letters. They're withdrawing the underlying application. So it's not that this is not happening. I think it's happening a lot, but I think that people being, you know, they're showing up at a visa office and then getting a dump of public sourced information. Please explain why the CPC is not going to be interested in you in the future.
Yeah.
Go.
Well, right now I'd say we have a case here, and you'd like to see maybe 3 or 4 other cases to kind of form the square of like, well, here's what the law actually is. The current case can be interpreted narrowly to say like certain very skilled Chinese applicants with specific study plans could be inadmissible, to as broad as like all
Doing
Chinese
science while being
people.
Chinese.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's so like there that needs to be narrowed.
Just acquiring knowledge while Chinese, I think.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That.
Acquiring knowledge while Chinese and AKWC.
And then the thing that you said last year too was that like we still don't know what they're looking at. So like I have a couple of ideas of things that if I see it on somebody's application, it's like, okay, this might be, but then there are many where there's absolutely nothing about the application on its face other than acquiring learning while being Chinese. That just means like, oh, you will be experiencing double or triple the normal processing time. You could maybe bring a mandamus, but it will probably have a neutral or nil effect on anything. And right now, by the way, mandamus doesn't really mean anything. So carry on.
Yeah.
So that's the news of 2024.
And that there's no real argument you can make in your defense other than I promise I won't. Like,
Yeah.
what do you,
Right.
how do you argue against that? Like, you
Yeah.
haven't done anything. It's something
Well,
you may or may
especially
not do.
exactly, especially because the whole conversation is about coercion too. And so there's been some interesting jurisprudence about like, do you need to be reckless? Do you need to be coerced? And it's sort of like, but I think we've a little bit lost the plot on what that actually means to be inadmissible.
Well, and the other, I mean, as I've talked about, it's bizarre that for people inside Canada, the concern is that IRCC is concerned that someone is going to go back to China and impart their knowledge. Therefore, we are going to send them back to China.
Yes.
It seems to achieve its own end. The other, I
Yeah.
mean, I think the big story of 2024 has to be the levels climb.
But I think, but wait though, to go back to what you just said, Steve, it also just that it really does foster great acrimony against Canada. And I completely get that. If I were going to be deported back to a place where I had made a concerted decision to leave because of a repressive regime, and then I got sent back because like
What do
we
you
talk
read
about
into the
weaponizing,
silence?
like
What do you read into the silence of both politicians, like the Chinese community? Like I've kind of been surprised that there hasn't been questions about it. Is it just not politically feasible right now because of the foreign interference inquiry, or because the response to these huge systemic delays outside of a few lawyers, complaining has been pretty silent.
I think
I
there's so
connected.
much going on with tariff and with trade. I think there's just so many irons in the fire. There's just not capacity like it's whack-a-mole. With this whole year has been just like
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's just for all of the global events, I think it's a very fraught period of time to be like it's not, I mean, I have never been somebody who kind of like holds back my opinion, but this is a time that I don't think presenting one's opinion is very widely accepted. Like I think we're all holding back a little bit because you put something out and all of a sudden you're being affiliated with these beliefs, these ideologies, like it's not a great moment
disagree,
for,
you're a bully.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. The kinds of, it's not a pleasant time. And I think that at the political level, they don't like, we talked, in an episode this year about, trying to have a national conversation. I actually, in hindsight, think this is a terrible time for that kind of a national conversation. People are very fearful. People are very um acrimonious, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hate just free flowing in our streets and everything. So I think everyone's just trying to like, just kind of carry on doing their thing. And so that's, I think, part of what is my sentiment for this year. I feel like we're not actually dealing with what we're dealing with ever. And that's the dis-ease that I have about how policy has gone over the year, is that like for example, for me, the most difficult development of this year is basically the fall of the federal court. And not because of the federal court, but because you break the immigration system, it has this cascading effect. And, Lev made this beautiful post about like it's had a crushing effect on this institution of justice. Nobody's gonna like cry and weep about what's happened to the federal court. They're looking at the housing numbers. They're much sexier in the newspaper. But what's happened to the inability to actually scrutinize the real cases, what's happening with the AI triage, like I feel like everything is so secretive. And I don't know, that's where
Your prediction or hope last year was that the federal court would implement measures to help expedite and make things more proactive at settlement. They came out with a pilot project for study permits.
which I think I kind of predicted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was also no digital PR card. That was the other I was
No.
listening.
Yeah.
And though I have been saying, and though IRCC has been saying that DPM3, which is the new portal, will be launched for representatives, it's already launched for self reps by June. I'm not feeling warm fuzzy that we're going to
Mhm.
see it by June.
No, we'll get fined for asking. What we the other thing that none of us predicted was the levels plan. That they would cut immigration 20%, that they would introduce caps on students, which happened actually right around the time just after we published the last episode, as well as work permits. Thoughts on the levels plan before we, and any other top stories before we get into predictions?
Well, like I think that they had to put they had to decrease the levels plan. Like they weren't processing was not keeping up with what they had planned, and it was just getting worse. So like I think that had to happen. I think like with flagpoling, I think so much has been like cudgel instead of knife. Like I really don't think that like levels plans had to come in, but the way they've done it, I don't think it had to be done. I think what they've done with the provincial allocations is excessively aggressive.
Yeah, agreed.
60% cut.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
where
that was the one element of the economic permanent immigration that had some kind of, I mean, at least in the West Coast, it made some kind of sense.
well, it feels
What
like
did?
punitive. It's like you did badly with the students, so we're going to take the PR away from you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I don't know what the rationale was behind that move at all.
But like
Well,
the
they got to make
provinces,
space for other categories.
Yeah, but those categories, I don't know anything about outcome measurements that we don't see any of that, but I imagine that the outcome measurements for provincial nominees would have been better than for I won't use your trigger word, Steve, but for like the federal skilled workers from outside Canada who came in on French points, like
Yeah.
in a French language draw. But like for me, I do really wonder like um yeah, like what are those outcomes like, and why are we still bringing in federal skilled workers with no connection to Canada when the Canadian experience class workers or the postgraduates who have Canadian experience can't get landed? I'm just confused.
and like anecdotally, a lot of the people that I know of who came in through the Francophone programs under Express Entry, they're moving to Quebec because they can't get jobs outside of Quebec. So it's
Yeah.
it's really, and then the family class applicants in Quebec are moving outside of Quebec because processing times are so abhorrent.
Yeah.
Like
And the plan, I mean, I also would not have predicted a plan that calls for reducing Canada's population and 1 to 2 million people having to leave.
Deanna, I wanted to ask you for the enhanced caregiver pilot program, like how does it work that they will come in as PRs, but then they have to work in a specific place? Like, how does that work with the charter?
So first of all, they don't have that program.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that they will have that program. They talked about it in June. We're now in December. Well, almost in January, and we've seen nothing. But what they've said now is that the work experience will be based on experience outside of Canada, and that you would come in as like you would come in as a permanent resident. So I don't have any idea how you still need an offer of employment, but I don't see how they can actually, unless they're doing it like the old, what was it? The entrepreneur category where it was like a conditional PR and then you had to apply to remove the condition after a period of time. But I don't see that being revived, but really the way that they've left it in this state is just confusing. And but also when you look at the levels plan, I don't see any space for such a program. So I'm confused about it altogether
Do
because
you
they
foresee if
have,
there's problems with LMIA fraud and people paying for LMIAs? That there
So
could be issues with caregivers being forced to pay for jobs and fraud?
well, you
Like,
can't come in on an LMIA for
no, but even
caregivers.
you just need a job offer.
yeah,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Like the same
Yeah, well, I mean,
concern
the
you'd think would
thing
exist.
with the job offers, they they are scrutinizing those job offers on the things filed in the old pilot, where they're calling the employers and they're having conversations with them and they're asking for further information. But there are huge procedural fairness issues because, anyways, I won't go into it, but but yeah, it hasn't worked under the old pilots either. So why that would then continue to be entrenched, even if it's a direct to permanent residence program. Yeah, there are many things I don't understand about the proposed pilot, including that you need to be working in that field. So it seems if you're a nurse who wants to work as a home support worker, that maybe doesn't qualify you because it's a nurse position and not a home support worker position. Again, I just don't understand. There's more questions than answers, and we've never gotten beyond that initial press release. So
so
Yeah.
they are built, I'm just looking at the supplementary, they are listed there in the levels plans for the next 3 years.
Oh, but they're lumped
yes,
in with like
Yeah.
4 or 5 other
three
programs.
others, and it's also including the backlog from the existing pilot. So,
Yeah,
and they do have a significant backlog from the existing pilot. So I don't know how to tease apart what actually is there for new intake.
yeah. And so for like, and then we've got like all the other programs that we're supposed to launch in spring or in fall
Yeah.
2024 that we're still waiting for, like the RN, the new rural and northern immigration program. We don't know the communities. We don't know when it's going to launch. It keeps getting pushed back. And the municipal program. So I could have sworn I saw something. There was something. It was in the Gazette. It was in some levels, but I can't find it where it recently in the last few months they talked about the municipal program that we talk about every year, because they talk about it
Yeah.
every year.
It'll be an election campaign promise.
But they took away the numbers from the provinces. So like now they're going to give them
Yeah.
to municipalities. Like,
No, and
They'll just
so
create
let's get
another
into
out of
predictions. This
status
is the
construction
hardest,
worker.
and exactly broaden that. This is probably the hardest year that we've done for predictions because we have a levels plan that we've discussed a bit, has many seemingly unworkable elements and assumptions. And we also probably will have an election. And it's difficult to make predictions without trying to guess what the different commitments will be and when that election will be. Unless there's a prediction you have to leap out, I have some specific questions. And
I think
let's just
things are
start
going
with
to
the
get a
big one.
lot. Yeah, they're going to get a lot worse before they get better. And I don't think like I know there's this idea that under the conservatives, things will be better for businesses and for economic immigration. I don't think that's the case. I think the conservatives are riding this anti-immigrant sentiment, and they don't care how that impacts employers, and how employers really need these foreign workers. And I think we really need to be very carefully watching this H-1B debate in the States, because I think we're very much going to see a reflection of it here.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think the conservatives will do if elected is abolish the francophone quota, which in of itself, without increasing numbers, frees up 20 to 30,000 spots, not spots, I guess people, but like if 20 to 30, so call it like 15,000 people who can get invited and express entry.
Well, I have so
So
much hatred for the fact that they've included this in express entry. It goes directly contrary to the purpose of express entry. Like the best and
the
the
francophone
brightest, and
jobs,
now
yeah.
we are taking from the bottom. Not to imply that francophones are at the bottom, they're not, but you are taking people with lower points, which causes everything else to move up. Like it's,
Yeah. Yeah. And
and they're
I
not
just,
staying.
Yeah, the stories of people who are just, you know, taking some time out of work to learn French in order so that they can qualify is just like, I don't understand what we're trying to accomplish with this.
Do you think that 1 to 2 million people will leave? Is it going to be a case of people hunkering down or people leaving? That seems to be the big question going into 2025. As the levels plan, as I mentioned, assumes 1 to 2 million people leave over the next 2 years. If not, less people have to get admitted as students and workers in order for their numbers to match. Do you foresee all the people leaving that they are planning on?
No, I don't.
Shaking her head, no.
Not all, I think we're gonna see, as we're already seeing, crazy asylum claim numbers. It's going to skyrocket. It's already skyrocketed. They're going to put in measures to bulk refuse asylum claimants. That's like they've already said they're planning on, or they're thinking of planning on doing this. So I think we can go with they're gonna do it.
Mhm.
So
What do you think the
And I
measure
think
whether those people,
also, I think also the
I-
numbers, like they're going to be an absolutely absurd number of humanitarian and compassionate applications.
So we don't think people
yeah,
will leave. Will that result in announcements of few? I agree. I don't think that, I think half of what they're forecasting, that surplus will leave, half will stay.
so like
Ironically, it's going to be the people with most options and other like who will end up leaving and just saying screw it. Um, then,
Yeah.
well, so if they don't, well, what do you think the asylum measures will be?
I think there'll be some kind of a pre-screening process that means that they can dismiss the claim outright. Um, I don't know if it'll be like a pre-hearing kind of a conference or something like that. But also I think that there will be like if you have not made your claim within such and such a period of time that you would have to go with a PRA rather than a refugee claim, something to that effect.
Yeah, I think they're going to bring back the designated safe countries of origin regime. Um, that's my prediction, and that the conservatives will pledge to use the notwithstanding clause during the election to bring it in.
You really want to use that notwithstanding clause at some point, don't you? You want to see somebody.
Do I want to see someone bring? I think, I mean, I think it's going to happen.
Mm,
I don't actually know if it's been used in British Columbia. I know it's been used in a few other provinces.
hmm.
David Eby, I mean, he's bringing in involuntary treatment what the courts have already struck down, so maybe he'll use it there. But like that's the DCO, I think, coming back. I've
Hmm.
also said this on the podcast. I think that the end of flag polling will extend to all port of entry work permit applications. I'm going to now clarify and expand on that as there's this list that they have on the IRCC website now of who's exempt from the new flag polling rules, which includes a certain free trade agreements, truck drivers, Americans. I think they'll still be allowed. I think that list is going to broaden to a complete ban on all port of entry work permits, except for the exceptions on the current exception to flag polling list, with the reason being, I don't see how they cap work permits if people can get them at the border.
but like the IMP numbers at they were not like for flagpoint, they were not that high. And so if you eliminate, like I said, the spouses, that takes out the vast majority of them. So
Hmm.
I don't think the numbers are that crazy. I do think that they're probably going to bring in hours at most, if not all, and possibly appointments at most, if not all. And one thing that IRCC had said they were going to do, and then we haven't heard anything about it since, was that they were going to put some kind of inland office for IRCC to deal with some of these applications, but then mum on anything actually happening since they first mentioned it. But like that would alleviate a lot of the problems for people who need to flagpole. The other problem with the other issue with flagpoling is CBSA seems to be confused about what the definition of flagpoling is. And they're saying like, oh no, you left Canada 2 weeks ago and you have an expired work permit. This is flagpoling. And like, no, that's not actually
No?
flagpoling. That's actually just applying for a work permit.
Yeah.
I mean, in my prediction, none of that will be, like, none of that will be happening because there won't be port of entry applications.
Mm. So you're not talking about ending flag polling, you're talking about ending port of entry applications.
Yeah,
So
I
you
just
think
don't see
all
the IMP is
applications
capped. I
online?
don't, all applications online, except the people who are currently exempt from the flag polling bar will be able to apply still in person. I think everyone, I just don't see how they have caps if they're issuing them out at the border, how they can handle their caps.
Well,
Yeah,
but I think they can handle their caps because they know historically that the numbers of those types of work permits just aren't that high.
Maybe, but they've also misbudgeted and allocated. Like they've failed to predict things before. I just think that they'll view it as, okay, CBSA would probably welcome it, and they already require all study permits to be online. So why not work permits? Especially if they're capped. Anyway, that's my dark horse prediction. People hate hearing it, but that's,
yeah.
Very much
Mhm.
so.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I see that coming to pass personally, but I do always ponder why they don't have something like what they use in other jurisdictions where when you've applied for something, you get like a status document that will take you for a particular period of time, like what they do in Australia, you know, like you apply, you get a document that's like that matches, like it's like a 6-month document, it's like a bridging permit or something like that. It would obviate the need for people to go get it, you know, like if it ultimately gets refused, then it's refused. But you know, at
Or
least in the meantime, people are like,
like if they fix the maintain status issue, if people could travel and maintain status, that would address
yeah,
so many of these issues,
exactly.
because then nobody would need to flagpole. They could submit online.
Yeah. Why don't they do that? Like, I just don't get that. Anyways, this was not what we're doing. We're just supposed to be predicting. And
Unless
I
you're
don't
predicting
predict that
that
they will
other.
actually change that. No,
I do
I
think they're
don't.
going to broaden business visitors in order to. So I like we've said the numbers are completely impossible, right? Like there's a cap on IMP which includes all asylum claims, and basically if you take the asylum claimants and the postgrads, you're basically at the cap. So in order to
Yeah.
address this, and they had the when they announced the ICT or when they published the ICT program delivery updates, intercompany transfer program delivery updates, they wrote in a few places to officers, please consider that maybe they are better suited as business visitors. And every immigration lawyer read it and said, but they aren't because they're working for a Canadian
Yeah.
end user. Like, so I think there's going to be some sort of a change, maybe at the policy side, in order to facilitate that. And there's going to be either a
Hmm.
broadening of IRPR 186 or the creation of a new category outside of both the TFWP and the IMP.
Or
I want to,
expand global skills strategy to
Yeah,
Block B maybe and make it for a longer duration
yeah,
or
right.
greater frequency.
yeah.
I want to go back for a second to the 1 to 2 million people leaving. Does anybody else think that there is going to be a massive increase in removals?
No.
I do.
Because with what capacity? Now they're
Yeah, I
sending
was gonna
people to the
say, do you think they're
border,
gonna
or they've
hire a
got
lot of people or
drones. They're like, who's now who's manning the removals? Everybody's patrolling the border now.
Yeah.
I haven't
Yeah.
seen any funding allocation. Like where are they gonna hold them? There's no province that has or there's very few provinces, if any, that have agreements to hold immigration detainees. I think they may just basically wait them out. So there's then the last kind of on my prediction before so in the fall economic statement, they announced that they were going to amend the IRPA to give IRCC the ability to cancel both permits and applications in the public interest. What do you think they're planning?
Hmm.
They could do what they did during COVID, which was all the TRVs before that September. It's just,
So instead of bulk approving them like they wound up doing, they'll be able to cancel them.
well, they did bulk cancel them before they bulk approved. A few years prior to the bulk approval, they did just a like, we're just not processing these anymore, and
Right. I
email
remember
us if
that.
you still want us to
Yeah.
continue with
Make a
your,
new application.
yeah. So I could see them doing that. I think like with the students, they've eviscerated the program, so they're probably not going to play with it too much more right now.
Parents and grandparents?
They're not doing much with it. They've
Do
said
you
that
foresee
they're
them canceling backlogs, permits? What are they? They're introducing it for a reason, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the regs that were brought in to, give CBSA the power to pick and choose what type of application they process was done at the time with the intention of ending flag polling. Now I think it's all port of entry. This, I don't know what it like. I mean, they're giving themselves the power to process permits in the public interest. Is that going to be at an individual level? Is that a way to address some of these backlogs of agency, self-employed? Just cancel them? Is it going to be if you file mandamus, they just cancel the application because, well, it's delayed anyways? I have no idea. It's sort of my great question mark on 2025 is
Mhm.
what do they plan on using this for? I don't actually have a prediction as much as just a question. What do you think?
I don't know, like there's always this thing with like work permits where it continues to be valid, like even if the person doesn't, if the underlying basis no longer exists, it continues to be valid. So they could say, like for students where it's 90 days after you end your studies, they could say for work permit holders, if it's 90 days and you're no longer employed, your work permit is automatically canceled or automatically no longer valid. Just like the study permit is no longer valid. They could do that.
I don't know. I I don't know what it's for.
Yeah, I
I
don't know
think
what
it's
it's
not
for
going to be
either.
good. I think we're not going to like it. I mean, the
No.
conservatives, when they were in power, terminated the federal skilled worker backlog, the immigrant investor backlog. The liberals have never done anything like that, passing legislation to terminate, but they
But like what programs really have such backlogs outside of like HNC refugees, but like, so we think they're gonna do something to the refugees. And self-employed, but like other than those, where express entry process very fast. Most of the economic programs process very quickly, and I don't think they're gonna mass cancel any of the economic ones.
Work permit extensions? That just seems bizarre.
in order to make people leave if their work permits are and their permits all get canceled. I don't know. I like that's been sort of I haven't formulated a clear prediction on it. I just think
No.
it's being brought in for something. Now,
I mean,
whether the
that's the
government
only
lasts long
backlog.
enough to bring it in, I don't know. But no, but it's not just there's backlogs and permits. Be a
Yeah.
way to get 2 million people to leave if their permits get canceled.
But do they leave or do they just go
I don't
underground?
know.
Okay. Yeah. Is it that like if a particular institution, a school is delisted, they just want to cancel all of the permits that are being issued to people allegedly attending that or like that
Could be.
came in on that school?
Or an employer closes?
I don't know. It was in the fall economic statement without any rationale provided as to why this is being done.
Yeah. No, I mean, I
Other
think
than the
you're
fall
right to be
economic
very
statement
afraid.
talking about reducing immigration levels to try to match, housing needs.
Yeah.
But my prediction is that the government won't last long enough to actually bring it in. So
So I guess how many changes do you think a conservative government would undo if they come in? And I don't think really any. I think they're
Me
just going to make
neither.
it worse.
Yeah. I agree.
Certainly not bringing back the Mexican ETA. We know that one.
no, that's not coming back.
Might get rid of
IRGC, they've
some of the
already
new
designated.
ETAs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that there's one that I mean, they all seem more like conservative uh restrictions, actually. It's almost like they're trying to win back their voter base that they think that they're losing. So I don't think that any of these new, I think it's more that this is too little too late is kind of I think what what the conservative platform is going to be.
I think the conservative platform will contain something along the lines of provinces not being allowed to nominate people in regulated professions unless they make the regulatory bodies grant them access to the profession faster. I think there'll be something, Poilievre's talked before about removing the gatekeepers from stopping immigrants from working in their professions. I think there'll be something along those lines.
Is this like a really, like in what occupations is this continuing to be a big issue? Because I think that in
Medicine.
BC, yeah, but is it still in most provinces?
Well, engineering, I mean, people have to, and there's ways around it, like you don't call
Yeah,
yourself an
exactly.
engineer in the title, but is that the solution to tinker with titles or to just say recognize the engineer? Trades?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean like,
Yeah,
yeah,
trades.
Did we
for
even
sure.
talk about how
Medicine.
there hasn't been a skilled trade draw since 2020?
Yeah,
Like,
Well, they
yeah,
brought in a
everybody's
skilled
talking, we can't
category.
build a house, but no, we can't bring in plumbers either. Sorry.
yeah,
No.
exactly.
Yeah. So what are your predictions, Deanna? Is the federal court gonna bring in their settlement thing that you're hoping for?
Well, I mean, I think that I'm hoping that they're going to at least expand the study permit. I'm not hoping, I am predicting that they will at least expand their study permit pilot to other programs. So maybe like to work permit refusals at ports of entry, something like that. But I think that they have such big capacity issues. But anyways, I think that I'll go that far and say that that's what they're going to do with that. But some part of me worries about there being some further change that prevents certain types of litigation getting through to the court at all.
Ooh, interesting. They've done that a bit with the parental and grandparent program, saying that if it stems directly and purely from the ministerial instructions, it's not judicially reviewable.
Mm,
Um, yeah. What's your
yeah,
dark horse prediction tomorrow?
I don't know. I really struggled.
yeah. It's a very it's a bit of a mind-boggling year to try and predict where we're going.
I
It's
just
like a
want to say
hailstorm.
bad. It's going to be very bad. I think we can all hunker down and say it's going to be a bad year.
Yeah,
And we're going to see a major increase in erroneous refusals and IRCC saying, too bad. Like,
yeah,
and I think we're already starting to see this, just the officers feeling very empowered to refuse, like for just completely baseless reasons.
yeah.
Um,
And that's, I think, the reason that I'm so troubled by the fall of the federal court is because they're being able to get away with it with impunity because the cost, the delay, everything that comes with trying to challenge an erroneous decision is like it's preventing it's like further strengthening the brazenness of that bad decision making.
okay,
We talk about okay,
I'll make a hopeful prediction. And this
okay,
is,
yes, please.
I'm hoping it's not pure pie in the sky. I'm hopeful that IRCC will find a way to fix their new interpretation that people who have re-entered on visitor records, that the status document is not their expiry date, because what they've been doing, I assume, like, I think we talked about this last year, that like as 6 months after you re-enter, even if you have a visitor record that's valid for longer, that your status expires on re-entry, or like 6 months after
6 months after.
re-entry. I'm very hopeful that IRCC is going to fix their new interpretation and stop refusing, finding that people are out of status if they
Are
stayed
they actually doing that?
Yes, they're doing this for children and they're doing this for spouses who have
Incredible, actually, that they're
valid
doing it for
visitor
children. That's
records.
the only scenario I've seen it where it's like, oh, the parents are fine. Kids, you gotta go.
That's absurd.
It is absurd. So I'm hopeful There's my prediction that they hopefully fix this new interpretation that they've come up with in the last year.
So is this like, because I remember they put in place a new stamping policy like 5, 6 years ago, I want to say, that was supposed to clarify it, where they needed to stamp, and that if they didn't stamp, it meant they were affirming that you were coming back into the duration of your visitor record,
I think
or
it's the theory that the visitor record expires when someone, like, it's voided when someone leaves Canada.
So
yes, but then when you
CBSA
come
and
back in,
No, but when you
yeah,
come back in, there's no more, that visitor record's gone. So it's just 6 months from whenever you come back in, even if the visitor record has another year expiring. That's the
but they could still
interpretation.
stamp and put the date that is the
They
end
could
date
they
on
still
your
could,
stamp
because
and
visitor
put the
CBSA
date,
record.
but if they don't, the interpretation is that it's 6 months, not to the end of the visitor record.
and this is
It's
IRCC's interpretation, not CBSA's interpretation. So
Oh my
CBSA doesn't feel
God.
the need to stamp because they think you're fine based on the visitor
Mhm.
record.
Right. That's absurd. Okay.
Yeah, that's, I mean, yeah.
No, any
It's
kind
very
of
weird.
collaboration between CBSA and IRCC, I do not predict, because they seem to be getting further and further apart rather than closer together on these sorts of things, but that's just an exercise in silliness.
Digital PR
Yeah.
card this year,
Nope,
broad-based innovation stream.
nope.
I
For
think we're
those
going to see a
listening,
lot of those
Tamara's,
H-1B holders trying to come up here. But
It's so
I,
hard to predict, right? Like, yeah, H1B. Jason Kenney, when he was on the podcast, predicted that there'd be almost a Vietnam War style migration north of possible Americans, and that Canada wasn't prepared for that. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a very interesting year where, like, yeah, the government wants numbers to go down. They don't have capacity to actually remove people.
what do you
And
think a
what
conservative government would do with, what is the case, Bonquist, the
yeah,
citizenship
yeah,
by
I was just
descent?
gonna ask about that, yeah. Well, it's that now they have to, the bill just, did it get, it's
So it got
still,
extended again because the
again,
government said that there was too many issues in Parliament, to which the judge said, well, you got the GST gimmick, to quote Freeland, through. But now I don't know if Parliament is prorogued, as some are predicting. I don't know what happens with that. I'm very
yeah.
surprised, to be honest, that the government never appealed that decision. So maybe they appeal it. I don't know if they didn't appeal the initial decision, could they appeal the judge dictating what the outcome is? I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, they could, if I would love to see the court finding well, they've already found the government in contempt, right? For not abiding. Anyways, it's just so bizarre, the stuff that we're talking about right now. But I just don't understand how they're going to pass that legislation in a way that's not going to open up citizenship to such a giant number of people, with very little connection to Canada. Um, and kind of make the whole conversation about levels a bit absurd.
Yeah, I think the parliamentary budget officer somehow guessed that the number would be in the tens of thousands, which is less than what lawyers like Amandeep have said.
Okay.
I think it would be a gift to Polyev for sure if a judge did enforce that. I don't know. It is very hard to, I mean, it's what makes it very hard to predict is, like, we don't know how long this government will last. We don't know what the campaign promises will be. And they have the mathematically impossible immigration plan.
Yeah.
Do you think anything will get better beyond the IRCC interpretation of visitor records, which seems so niche that I don't think they're going to clarify it, because there's so much other stuff that they're going to be grappling with that,
Mhm.
yeah. Especially if Parliament is prorogued, like, yeah. Like, you
I'm
wind up
hoping
trying to predict the year, becomes trying to become a political pundit and predict, like, will Trudeau resign? If there's a leadership race, what will the different leaders pledge? If there isn't a race and there's an election, which there may be anyways, what do the different parties, what will the result be? very.
What
hard
do
to
you
say.
think CRS scores will drop to once they change qualifying offer of arranged employment?
Assuming they don't replace it with anything else, it'll come down
But how
know.
much? Because
50 points.
arranged employment in 2023 only represented 9% of
Oh, okay.
profiles.
Then, well, but I mean, that's gonna be coupled with provinces losing 60% of their quotas. So CRS will come down, but like the
Not
range
much.
of draws will likely, like, it'll probably just hover around. Well, they'll just be like the CRS points will come down, but like
I
they'll
don't think
just
it's
be
going to come down
stubbornly
as
high,
much
I
as
think. Yeah.
because I don't think this impacts the number of people people think it impacts. I think it's a fairly well like 2023 9%, so it's like not that huge a number. And I think that the bigger impact would be if they stopped pulling the francophone draws at
Mhm.
300.
Careful tomorrow. You might get called anti-francophone.
I
Yeah.
love francophones. Also, I'm fluent. I'm from Montreal. Uh,
Yeah.
The no, but the CRS points may also just come down if there's less people getting in the pool and they're only doing Canadian draws.
The
And
only
then all
way
these
to
people who are
me,
claiming asylum are knocking out their ability to ever be in the pool. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. The only way to me that there could be an optimistic outcome is if we tried for a minute to, rather than looking to a quantitative assessment of newcomers, to go back to the old fashioned way of doing a qualitative look at who is actually being accepted. And I don't believe that that's going to
No,
happen. But I do
no.
feel like we've become so obsessed with this kind of algorithmic assessment about who's going to be a good applicant and who's not, that we've completely lost the plot on what are we actually looking for, what is going to have good outcomes, who constitutes, like who is in that group of like 8 people that is getting an invite to the PNP, who is in the group that's getting the invites through the express entry, like qualitative.
well,
Are these people who are intending to
So here's
stay?
one.
Like,
Our past guest, Mikhail Skutterud, has said that there are ways of predicting based on the school one went to and their program income at least. Do you foresee the conservatives adopting something like that into their platform to start weighting schools differently?
no, but I do foresee the potential for the reintroduction of a negative occupation list like they had for federal skilled worker.
That express entry isn't dominated by retail sales supervisors?
Yeah.
food service supervisors. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a surprising number of CEOs with arranged employment or
Uh,
senior managers. That there's a surprising number. Uh,
I
and also
remember before
admin assistants and admin officers.
global talent stream was launched, they were, well, I just remember like telling some people within government when different options were being considered that if they made it all knock zero occupations eligible for the global talent stream, that they would have the assistant ketchup manager, the assistant mustard manager, the assistant relish manager.
yeah.
All right,
But it,
yeah, go ahead.
no, go
Oh,
ahead.
before we wrap it, any last dark horse predictions?
I hope they take this spouse open work permit thing off the table. I hope it dies a quiet death and they don't actually eviscerate C41.
Oh, I think
They're going to, but I really
the
hope they
comment
don't.
that I've had throughout the year is every time there's a by-election, within a week or two of that, there's a bunch of immigration measures after another loss. I don't know if there's any by-elections coming up, but like as Deanna's and you have said, the sentiment on this has changed, and it's going to be a race to the stricter and more limited for immigration. And it's going to be very interesting practicing immigration law when the immigration system is designed to reduce Canada's population.
Yeah. I
But
think that,
also we're going to have to do so many more applications. That like the end of the multiple entry visa. So so now we're doing 2 visas, 3 visas for the same person. Like, so we're
yeah,
gonna clog the system with that now because that's a good use of resources.
yeah, my hope, and again, this is not a prediction, but just that people start like that we start to see some change in that public sentiment piece. That like, um, you know, I think that until that happens, there's not going to be any policy shift because really right now, when Steve and I have been saying this for months, that they're just chasing votes. And that they think that this is what the public wants, and therefore they're doing this, and it makes them people feel like, they're being heard and that they're going to be like looking after the increase of cost of living and all this sort of thing. But when people start to see that like there aren't people working in the healthcare positions, there aren't people, that there are skill shortages, that there are, like gaps in our communities because we're pushing people out. And I don't know. That's
I
just
don't
the
know
hope.
that people see it. And like I hear like on my recent trip, so much garbage from like especially my mother's age group, um, like repeating rumors and like crazy rumors, like the federal government pays employers to bring in like incentivizes them to bring in foreign workers and subsidizes the salaries. I've like I keep hearing this. I've heard this multiple times. I'm like, who's
I don't
spreading
know where
these
that's
rumors? But
coming from.
as long as this stuff is circulating, and it is very much circulating now, I don't think we're
Yeah.
seeing a change in public sentiment about
Yeah.
immigrants.
If there is a
Like
big
I
uptake
just
in asylum claims from international students, that sentiment is going to worsen before it gets
Yeah, for
better.
sure. But I mean, we talked about this when we had that episode with the Chamber of Commerce. No, where is
Canadian
she
Chamber of
from?
Commerce. No,
Yeah,
like the Conference Board of Canada.
Conference Board of
Alice Craft.
Canada. Yeah, just the idea that like I think Canada started thinking that like it's our way or nobody's way, but to think about like, we're actually looking for great insights from other places. Like who's doing this better than us? Because we're not killing healthcare. I can tell you that we're not killing it. So like trying to actually
No, we are
gain
literally killing
insights.
it.
Yeah, we are killing it. Exactly. So like just the idea, like we were talking all this stuff, this garbage that I'm hearing too is all about these Canadian values and stuff like that. Like, what does that actually mean right now, except for like exclusion and, fear and all of this kind of thing? Like, I would love to see like a breathing back in of like, no, actually, we have a lot to learn from other jurisdictions so that people aren't going to Korea or Thailand to get their medical care because they can't get it here. So yeah, like I think that there's a lot to be learned from drawing upon that expertise. And I feel like that's really being like lost in this muddle of housing crisis, but I feel like we're stunting ourselves.
Yeah. Well, that was we didn't land on an answer, but when we spoke with Mikhail Skudderud, like what does it look like when a country tries to reduce its population? Presumably the economy worsens just by GDP, maybe not GDP per capita necessarily. I think there's an assumption that people have that, oh, the people goes down, GDP per capita might go up. I don't see why that's necessarily the case. Could just be
No.
GDP goes down, and what that all looks like, who gets blamed. Yeah, I think that it is going. Okay, here's the last question. Do you think we will look back in 2025 at the end of the year and go, boy, we were so negative. God, what a bunch
I
of
hope
doomers and
so.
gloomers we were.
I hope so. I thought
Yeah.
like, when I was like, what can I, how can I describe 2024? And I keep seeing these ads for this Minion fart blaster. And I think that if I had to summarize 2024,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think that we're actually being that negative. I think we're saying that there's nowhere to go but up. I think we're just saying like all this crap has
Oh,
happened.
That's gonna
That's
be
what I'm
famous,
saying anyway.
famous last words. There's nowhere to
Yeah.
go but up. And I'll bet you next week, Deanna will open the year going, what the hell? I jinxed it. I can't believe this
Yeah.
new change.
I
Maybe
don't
there's
know.
nowhere to
I
go
have
but
to be
up. There's gonna
hopeful,
be disposal
honestly.
restrictions coming in.
Like, I think things will go up. I don't think it's gonna be in 2025. And probably not in 2026. I think right now it's hunker down. It's hunker down and have a very honest conversation with your clients. That we're in for a really rough ride. Like I've been looking for months at people, like I am already looking at my 2025, 2026 extensions and saying, we need to talk about how we're extending you in 2026 because we have a
Mhm.
problem.
I mean, this is where though, like in terms of just how perception is, like if the Liberals are doing and Mark Miller is doing all the heavy lifting now, then if Pierre Poilievre wins, even just that change with the people are gonna keep calling me anti-francophone, but like removing the anti-francophone and dispersing that points to the general population will suddenly bring optimism to a lot of people and just shift sentiment. Like I think there are narrow, easy wins that a new Poilievre government could have. Yeah. So
And I
we will
think the
see.
provinces with their new limited allocation, like they have room, a lot of room. The provinces have a lot of room for improvement in what they've been doing too. Like Ontario in this program last year, I spoke about how they hadn't had a draw since 2022. Well, then they did in March. They had one general all occupation draw, but that's one. And other than that, they've been pretty much picking from the same pool as the federal government. So
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll see this time next year. It's gonna be a
Good
whirlwind
luck.
of a year. Might have to do a
It's gonna
mid-year
be a
update.
doozy. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Could be.
Enjoy the rest of your holidays.
thank you, you
Yeah.
too.
All right. Cheers.
Bye for
Bye.
now.